Previously in Part 1. In rain-lashed Vidya, ghost assassin Nyx Voss erased Senator Blackwood, then was ordered to kill radiant heiress Ellie Morgan. Seeing her goodness and uncovering the client her brother Lucian Nyx refused, abducted Ellie to protect her, and became the shield as rival killers close in. For Part 1, link is in the description. Before Nyx Voss could protest, Ellie Morgan's hands were on her temples, her fingers gently smoothing the furrows from her brow. Nyx Voss froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What are you doing?" Nyx Voss asked, her voice tight. "Giving you a head massage. Now hush and lean back." To her own utter astonishment, Nyx Voss did. She let her head fall back, and Ellie Morgan guided it into her lap. The world narrowed to the feeling of Ellie Morgan's soft thighs beneath her head, the gentle rhythmic pressure of her fingers on Nyx Voss's scalp, the faint scent of her shampoo, something floral and entirely too cheerful for an assassin's safe house. A deep primal tension she hadn't even known she was carrying began to unspool. Her eyes fluttered shut. This was a vulnerability worse than any firefight, a surrender more complete than any she had ever known, and it was terrifyingly addictive. Ellie Morgan looked down at the fierce, beautiful woman in her lap, whose defenses were finally truly down. "You don't own curtains," Ellie Morgan mused, her voice a soft tease. "Are you allergic to joy or just to anything that's not gray and painful?" Nyx Voss, her eyes still closed, found her lips quirking into something almost like a smile. "Curves are structural weaknesses. Joy is a distraction." Ellie Morgan hummed, her fingers tracing the shell of Nyx Voss's ear, making her shiver. "I think you're full of it. I think you secretly love my carbonara, and I think you're going to let me buy you a pillow tomorrow. Don't push your luck, sunshine," Nyx Voss muttered, but there was no heat in it. She was losing the battle, and a treacherous, long, dormant part of her was thrilled to be conquered. The banter had turned into a delicate, flirtatious dance. Nyx Voss pretended annoyance while secretly craving every touch. Ellie Morgan teased while offering a tenderness Nyx Voss hadn't known existed. A domestic intimacy was building in the cold, sterile space, and with it, Nyx Voss's protectiveness was morphing into something far more dangerous and far more personal. Part 6. The first threat. The domestic bubble lasted for 3 days. 3 days of Ellie Morgan's cooking, perfuming the sterile air, of soft laughter bouncing off the hard surfaces, of Nyx Voss reluctantly accepting a second mug and a ridiculously fluffy pillow. It was a dangerous illusion, a shared dream, and Nyx Voss, the realist, knew it was on borrowed time. The first crack in the facade came not as a bang, but as a silent digital whisper. Nyx Voss was at her desk, her fingers a blur over the keyboard, running a passive sweep of known assassin chatter on the dark web. Ellie Morgan was cross-legged on the bed, sketching on a tablet she'd had delivered, humming absently. The scene was deceptively peaceful. Then a specific alert flashed on one of Nyx Voss's secondary monitors. A trigger word in an encrypted channel she monitored religiously, Mikhail, followed by a location grid that was frighteningly close. Her entire body went still. The relaxed slope of her shoulders snapped into a rigid line. The softness in her eyes, which had begun to appear in Ellie's presence, vanished, replaced by the cold, flat focus of a predator. Ellie Morgan noticed the change instantly. The humming stopped. "Nyx Voss, what is it? Get in the bathroom." Now Nyx Voss's voice was a low, sharp command. All traces of their earlier banter gone. She was already moving, crossing the room in 3 swift strides to a panel hidden in the wall. It hissed open, revealing not clothes, but an arsenal. Neat, lethal, and gleaming. "What's happening?" Ellie Morgan asked, her voice rising in panic as she scrambled off the bed. "The other scalpel," Nyx Voss said, her words clipped as she selected a compact suppressed submachine gun and checked the magazine with a practice slap. "The messy one is here bathroom. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." The raw fear on Ellie Morgan's face was a physical blow. But Nyx Voss had no capacity for comfort now. She was a weapon being loaded, every sense sharpening, the world narrowing to a tactical funnel. She shoved a pistol into the waistband at the small of her back and tossed a Kevlar vest onto the bed. Put this on now. Elara Morrow, trembling, did as she was told, fumbling with the straps. Nyx Voss didn't wait. She was already at the main terminal, her fingers flying. She pulled up the building security feeds. Nothing in the lobby, nothing in the halls. Then the service elevator. A large hulking figure in maintenance coveralls, his face obscured by a cap and a toolbox in his hands. He was too big, his posture all wrong for a technician. It was Mikhail the Bull Sokolov. He was coming up the back way. Nyx Voss's mind calculated vectors and timelines. He would bypass her door. He'd go for the roof or the floor above. Then, rappel down. He'd try to come through the window. The one element of the safe house that was a necessary vulnerability is coming from outside, she muttered, grabbing a harness and a coil of thin, incredibly strong rope. He'll want a flashbang through the glass, then a straight assault. No finesse. She turned to Elara Morrow, who was standing frozen by the bathroom door, the vest looking comically large on her. Nyx Voss's gaze was fierce, absolute. No matter what you hear, do not open that door. He is not here to talk. She all but pushed Elara Morrow into the bathroom and heard the lock click shut. Good. The safe house was plunged into silence. Nyx Voss killed all the lights, plunging the space into the deep gray gloom of the tinted windows. She stood in the center of the room, becoming just another shadow, her breathing shallow and silent. She could hear her own heartbeat, a steady, slow drum counting down the seconds. Then a faint scraping sound from above on the roof, right on schedule. A moment later, a figure blurred past the window, descending on a rope. Nyx Voss didn't move. She waited. The figure stabilized itself just outside the main pane of glass. She saw the bulk of him, the gleam of a compact breaching charge in his hand. Now, as his arm drew back to place the charge, Nyx Voss moved. She didn't go to the window. She lunged for the panel controlling the electrochromic glass and slammed it to full clear. The effect was instantaneous. The window, which had been a dim mirror from the outside, became perfectly transparent. Mikhail Sokolov, his face a mask of brutal focus, was suddenly staring directly into the room, directly into Nyx Voss's cold, waiting eyes. He froze for a split second, shock breaking his concentration. It was all the advantage she needed. Nyx Voss suppressed. Weapon coughed twice. The bullets punched through the glass, creating spiderweb cracks around to neat holes. Both rounds hit Mikhail's center mass. The Kevlar vest he wore under his coveralls stopped them, but the impact was like being hit with a sledgehammer. It knocked the wind from his lungs and sent him spinning awkwardly on his rope. He roared, a sound of pure fury, and instead of retreating, he embraced the chaos. He fired his own weapon wildly, shattering the already compromised window. Glass rained into the room like diamond hail. Nyx Voss was already moving, diving behind the reinforced steel frame of her bed as return fire chewed into the wall where she'd been standing. The room rang with the unrestrained thunder of Mikhail's rifle, a savage, chaotic noise that violated every tenet of her craft. He was trying to boot his way through the splintered window now. A bull barging into a china shop. Nyx Voss rose from cover and loosed another measured burst, this time targeting his rapeline. The specialty round snapped the cord with a taut twang. Mikhail shouted, dropping several feet before his safety rig yanked him to a punishing halt. Now dangling uselessly just beyond the shattered frame, exposed and off balance. Nyx Voss did not hesitate. She lunged forward, stepping through the curtain of shards onto the thin ledge outside. Wind tore at her hair. The city sprawled 50 stories below. Mikhail, dazed and struggling to bring the weapon to bear, was an easy mark. This was no longer defense. This was a message, a warning written in blood and glass. She let her SMG fall to the sling. Metal-kissed fabric. Momentum stilled. In a single smooth motion, she drew the combat blade strapped to her thigh. Mikhail's eyes widened as she seized a fistful of his harness and hauled him toward her. He swung a heavy fist, but she slipped past it neatly. Her movements precise and economical. Castian should have sent a ghost, she hissed, her voice barely carrying over the wind. Not a bull. She drove the knife into the side of his neck, just above the armor. It was a brutal, intimate kill, close enough to feel his breath. A wet, bubbling sound followed. His thrashing stopped, his eyes glazing with shock, and the swift onset of death. Nix Voss held him a beat, confirmed the job, then pushed him away. Mikhail the Bull Sokolov dropped into the night, his body swallowed by city's dark. Nix stepped back inside, adrenaline still singing in her blood. The safe house was wrecked. Everything felt tilted, newly dangerous. Glass grated under her boots. Wind roared through the broken window, flinging papers from her desk. Her breath came hard, a shallow cut on her cheek weeping a single thread of red. Her knuckles were abraded, skin split across bone, throbbing each heartbeat. The bathroom door eased open. Elara Morrow stood there, her face as white as the Kevlar she still wore. Her eyes were huge, taking in the ruin. The jagged glass, the bullet scars in the wall, the blood on Nix's face and hands. She saw the raw, unvarnished violence in Nix's gaze, the feral power that had just been loosed. She saw the killer unmasked. Elara didn't scream. She didn't swoon. She only stared, her breath hitching. Nix traced her line of sight, seeing the room as Elara did. The domestic dream lay broken, in both senses. The reality of her world had torn in. She expected horror, disgust, fear of her, the usual cocktail she'd seen 100 times. Instead, Elara's expression shifted from shock to something else. Something fierce, resolved. She took a tentative step, then another. Eyes fixed on blood trailing down Nix's arm from a gash opened by a flying shard. "You're hurt," Elara said, her voice remarkably steady. "It's nothing," Nix replied, voice rough. She tried to turn away, to begin work of cleanup and damage control. "I need to secure the window." "No," Elara said, and there was a new authority in her tone. She moved right up to Nix Voss, into her personal space, into the aura of violence and sweat and curdite that clung to her. She reached out, her hand trembling only slightly, and took Nix Voss's wounded arm. Nix Voss flinched, not from pain, but from the gentleness of the touch. "Elara, don't. It's fine. You've killed a man for me today," Elara Morrow said, her blue eyes holding Nix Voss's stormy gray ones, not allowing her to look away. Her grip on Nix Voss's arm was firm. "The least you can do is let me disinfect you." The banter was there, a brave attempt to cover the seismic shift happening between them. But it couldn't mask the raw emotion underneath. The air was thick with it, with the aftermath of violence, with the stark reality of the protection Elara Morrow had just received, and with the terrifying, undeniable surge of feeling that passed between them. As Elara Morrow's fingers gently probed the cut, Nix Voss stopped resisting. She stood there motionless, her defenses in ruins, as Elara Morrow led her to the bed, fetched the first aid kit, and began to clean the wound with a tenderness that was more disarming than any fight. The contrast was dizzying, the ruthless efficiency of the assassin moments before, now submitting to the gentle, meticulous care of the heiress. Their hands touched as Elara Morrow passed her the antiseptic wipe. Their eyes met. The unspoken feelings were a physical weight in the room, heavier than the smell of gunpowder, more potent than the blood. The line between protector and protected had not just blurred. It had been utterly incinerated. Part 7. Family ties severed. The safe house, once a sterile shell, now hummed with the warmth had brought into it. The scent of her perfume lingered on the couch cushions, and a half-finished mug of her favorite tea sat on the chrome counter. But the domestic peace was a fragile illusion. Nix Voss could feel the clock ticking. The failed hit by the rival assassin wasn't the end. It was a provocation. The client, Elara Morrow's own brother, would only escalate. He won't stop, Nix Voss stated, her voice a low, cold thing in the warm room. She was cleaning her pistol at the table, her movements economical and precise. He's panicked now. He'll either hire a better team or do something stupid himself. We can't wait for it. Elara Morrow, curled in an armchair, hugged her knees tighter. The reality of her brother's betrayal was a wound that refused to scab over. What are you going to do? Nix Voss slid the magazine into the grip with a definitive click. I'm going to have a conversation with him to clarify the terms of your family's inheritance. The look in Nix Voss's eyes was one Elara Morrow had never seen directed at her. A flat Arctic emptiness that promised violence. It sent a shiver down her spine, but not entirely of fear. It was the shudder of seeing the true unfiltered nature of the wolf that had chosen to guard her. The hunt. Nix Voss didn't go to Lucian Morrow's lavish uptown penthouse. She knew he wouldn't be there. A man who hired assassins from the shadows would himself be hiding in one. It took her less than 3 hours to find him. She bypassed his digital security, tapped into his panic-fueled communications, and traced him to a discreet members-only club downtown. A place where wealthy men went to feel important and untouchable. She watched from a shadowed doorway across the rain-slick street as Lucian Morrow arrived, flanked by two hulking bodyguards. He was everything she despised, entitled, weak, and cruel. He had Elara Morrow's blonde hair and blue eyes, but on him they looked cold and avaricious. He laughed at something, a sharp barking sound that carried no joy, and disappeared inside. Nix Voss didn't follow. She became part of the city's backdrop, a patient specter. She watched the staff entrance, the delivery bay, memorizing routines. She needed him isolated. She needed a place with no witnesses. The confrontation. Her opportunity came hours later. Lucian Morrow, likely feeling emboldened by whiskey and the full security of his bodyguards, decided to leave through a private rear exit to avoid the paparazzi out front. He dismissed his guards with a wave, telling them to bring the car round. For one precious minute, he was alone in the damp, narrow alley, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. Nix Voss moved like liquid night. One moment he was alone, the next, a hand was clamped over his mouth, an arm like a steel bar locked around his chest, and he was being dragged backward into a service elevator she had already disabled and held open. The door slid shut, sealing them in a cold metal tomb. She released him, and he spun around, choking on fear and smoke. He saw her then, not the ghost of underworld legend, but a very real, very angry woman whose eyes held the promise of a swift and final end. Who are you? Do you know who I am? He blustered, his voice cracking. I know exactly who you are. Lucian Morrow, Nix Voss said, her voice eerily calm. I'm the investment you made in your sister's future. It appears there's been a default. His bravado evaporated, replaced by raw, sweating terror. You were supposed to be the best. She's just one girl. How could you fail? Let's call it a professional reassessment, Nix Voss replied, taking a step forward. He flinched back against the cold elevator wall. I found the merchandise to be of unexpectedly high quality. Unlike you. You hired me to kill your sister because Daddy left her the company and you just got a trust fund. Is that the sum of it? Petty jealousy. It's not petty. It was mine. She doesn't deserve it. She's just a smiling charity-giving simpleton. He spat venom overriding his fear. Nix Voss's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. It grew colder, sharper. She's 10 times the person you'll ever be. And you thought you could erase something that beautiful because you wanted a bigger allowance. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't need to. His confession, his whining entitlement was all the justification she needed. This wasn't a contract anymore. This was personal. The reckoning. He saw the decision in her eyes and began to beg. To offer her money, double her fee, triple. His words were a pathetic, slobbering mess. Nix Voss didn't even hear him. Her world had narrowed to a single cold equation. This man was a threat to Elara Morrow's light. Therefore, he had to be extinguished. It was quick, brutally efficient, a professional's work. There was no rage, no dramatic monologue, just the application of lethal force. One moment he was a sobbing, pleading man. The next he was a problem that had been permanently solved. She made him disappear. The cleanup was methodical, a series of practice steps she could perform in her sleep. The body was never to be found. There would be no closure for the Morrow family, only a mystery. A rich, feckless heir who ran into trouble with the wrong people and vanished. The world would assume he owed money to someone far worse than a hitwoman. Nix Voss ensured the scene supported that theory. The return. Hours later, she returned to the safe house. The rain had stopped and a faint pre-dawn light was beginning to bleed into the sky. She stood for a moment on the threshold, consciously shedding the persona of the mercenary. She took a deep breath, pushing the coldness down, locking it away. For Elara Morrow, she entered, moving quietly, but Elara Morrow was awake, sitting on the couch in the dim light. Wrapped in a blanket, Nix Voss. Her voice was soft, laced with worry. "It's done," Nix Voss said, her voice deliberately casual as she shrugged off her jacket. She kept her back turned, hiding the minor scrapes on her knuckles, the faint speckle of blood on her collar that she'd missed. "He won't bother you again." Elara Morrow didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. The finality in Nix Voss's tone, the subtle shift in her energy from coiled tension to resolved calm, told her everything. She saw the way Nix Voss held herself, the ghost of violence still clinging to her like a chill. Days later, when it was finally safe, Nix Voss took Elara Morrow home. They stood in the opulent foyer of the Morrow estate as Elara's parents' faces, drawn with grief and confusion, explained that Lucian Morrow was missing. The police were investigating, but there were leads, unsavory ones, debts, dangerous associations. Elara Morrow listened, holding her mother's hand. She then glanced over her mother's shoulder at Nix Voss, who stood by the door, a silent, impassive statue. Nix Voss met her gaze, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, not into something soft, but into something fiercely, possessively proud. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touched her lips, a slow, deliberate wink. And in that moment, Elara Morrow knew with absolute certainty. The threat was not just over. It had been erased. There was no fear in her heart, no horror at the method. Instead, a profound, shocking wave of safety and gratitude washed over her. Her brother had chosen to bring a monster into their family feud. He just never imagined the monster would choose her. Part 8. Separation. The grand manicured grounds of the Morrow estate felt like a gilded cage after the stark, intimate honesty of Nix Voss's safe house. The reunion with her parents was a flood of tears, relieved hugs, and anxious questions. Elara Morrow went through the motions, holding her mother, accepting her father's trembling embrace, but a part of her remained detached, her focus tethered to the silent, dark-clad figure lingering by the doorway. Nix Voss had delivered her. The assignment was complete, as the family's initial emotional storm began to subside, replaced by the low, serious murmurs of lawyers and private security. Nix Voss caught Elara's eye. With a barely perceptible tilt of her head, she indicated the sprawling terrace outside the French doors. Elara Morrow excused herself, her heart beginning a frantic drum against her ribs. The afternoon sun was warm, dappling through the ancient oak trees. It was a picture of peace and safety, everything Nix Voss had fought to return to her. They stood for a moment, the heirs in her elegant, slightly rumpled clothes and the hit woman in her tactical blacks. Two creatures from different worlds colliding in the stillness. "You're leaving," Elara Morrow said. It wasn't a question. Nix Voss's gaze was fixed on the horizon on the city's skyline in the distance. My part here is done. You're home. You're safe. Your parents have hired enough security to guard a small nation. Unnecessary, but it makes them feel better. The words were logical, final, but Elara Morrow could see the tension in the line of Nix Voss's jaw, the way her hands were clenched slightly at her sides. You could stay, Elara Morrow offered, her voice softer than she intended. They eyed. We could find a reason. A personal security consultant. Something. Nix Voss finally looked at her, and the emotion in her eyes was so raw it stole Elara's breath. It was a tumultuous mix of longing, fear, and a deep ingrained belief that she didn't belong in this sunlit world. And then what? Elara Morrow. Nix Voss's voice was low, husky. I become your shadow in your parents' house. The grim reminder of what your brother did. The hired killer who drinks tea in your parlor. She shook her head, a gesture of profound finality. I don't do this. She gestured vaguely between them and at the opulent estate. I protected you. That doesn't mean I get to stay. The unspoken words hung heavily in the air. That doesn't mean I get to have you. This isn't a transaction, Nix Voss. Elara Morrow insisted, taking a step closer. You didn't just protect me. You see me and I see you. Nix Voss's mask of cool indifference slipped, revealing a flash of aching vulnerability. That's why I have to go. I can't. I won't be the monster who earns your affection because I killed for you. That's not a foundation. That's a trauma bond. She took a sharp, almost painful breath. If there's something real here, it needs space to breathe away from all this. It was the most emotionally articulate Elara Morrow had ever heard her be, and it shattered her resolve. Nix Voss wasn't running from her. She was running from the circumstances, trying to give them a chance at something pure, something that wasn't born from blood and fear. The goodbye was awkward, a chasm of things unsaid, yawning between them. Nix Voss gave a stiff, almost formal nod. Elara Morrow, her eyes glistening, did the only thing she could. She reached out and took Nix Voss's hand, squeezing it tightly, imprinting the feel of her skin into her memory. Nix Voss's hand trembled slightly in hers before she gently, reluctantly, pulled away. Without another word, Nix Voss turned and walked across the terrace, down the stone steps, and disappeared into the shadows of the garden path. She never looked back. The ache of absence. The world lost its color. For Elara Morrow, the grand rooms of her family home felt cavernous and empty. The bed was too big, too soft. She missed the firm, minimalist couch, and the sound of Nix Voss methodically cleaning her weapons. She'd catch a glimpse of a dark-haired woman on the street, and her heart would leap, only to crash down moments later. For Nix Voss, the safe house was a tomb. It was no longer sleek and efficient. It was barren and cold. The air no longer carried the scent of Elara Morrow's perfume, or the warmth of her cooking. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of memories. She'd find a long blonde hair on her pillow, and her chest would constrict with a pain sharper than any wound. The digital lifeline. The first text came 2 days later at 2:17 a.m. Nix Voss. You should be asleep. Elara Morrow, who had been staring at her phone, answered immediately. Elara, the bed is too quiet. I think it's broken. Nix Voss. I'm sure your father can buy a new one that makes more noise. Elara Morrow. He could, but it wouldn't snore softly after a nightmare. There was a long pause. Elara Morrow could imagine Nix Voss's flustered expression. Nix Voss. I do not snore, Elara Morrow. It was more of a cute, grumbly purr, like a disgruntled panther. The banter became their anchor. Nix Voss's texts were dry, clipped, and infrequent, but they were a lifeline. Nix Voss. Your security detail is incompetent. The man by the south gate is reading a book. Elara Morrow. It's prow. Should I tell him to switch to something more tactical? A gun manual perhaps? Nix Voss. It would be a start. Elara Morrow, miss you. Nix Voss never responded to the sentimental ones directly. Instead, Elara Morrow would get a message hours later. Nix Voss saw a woman today who looked like she'd never had a bad day in her life. Smiled at a pigeon. Reminded me of you. Elara Morrow was the pigeon plotting world domination. Nix Voss. It had a shifty look. I took preventative measures. Attached. A slightly blurry photo of a pigeon eating a croissant Nix Voss had clearly provided. The distance was a physical ache, a constant gnawing in both their chests. The texts were a poor substitute for the sound of each other's laughter, for the electric charge of a casual touch. The feelings they had masked with sarcasm and practicality in person were now laid bare in the digital silence between messages, undeniable and terrifying. They were two halves of a whole, orbiting each other, desperate to collide again. Part 9. Confession. The digital banter, once a lifeline, had become a form of exquisite torture. The pings and notifications were ghosts of a presence, a constant reminder of the person who was not there. Elara Morrow moved through her days in her family's gilded world like a specter, smiling at the right moments, attending charity galas, and reassuring her parents. But her heart was in a sterile, minimalist safe house across the city. Weeks had passed. The texts from Nix Voss were growing shorter, the pauses between them longer. Nix Voss was retreating, believing distance was a gift, a necessary purification of their connection from its violent origins. Elara Morrow knew better. She knew with every fiber of her being that what they had was not a scar to be healed in isolation, but a living thing that needed light and air to grow. And she was done waiting for it to be given permission. She knew where to find her. Nix Voss was a creature of habit and secure locations. The safe house was her anchor. The storm, a torrential autumn rain, was lashing the city the night Elara Morrow decided to end their separation. It felt symbolic. The world was weeping. The tears Nix Voss refused to shed. She didn't call. She didn't text. She simply drove, her hands tight on the wheel, her heart hammering a frantic, determined rhythm against her ribs. The warehouse district was desolate, the rain creating halos around the few functioning streetlights. She parked a block away, not wanting to announce her arrival. With headlights pulling her coat tight against the chilling downpour, she ran, her heels clicking on the wet pavement until she stood before the unmarked industrial door. She didn't hesitate. She punched in the code she'd memorized weeks ago, the date of their first real conversation in the car after the kidnapping. The lock disengaged with a heavy thunk. The confrontation, the inside was exactly as she remembered, yet felt utterly alien without Nix Voss's presence filling it. It was cold, dark, and silent, save for the drumming of rain on the high windows. Nix Voss. Her voice echoed in the vast open space. A shift in the shadows. A figure emerged from the bedroom doorway, backlit by a single lamp. Nix Voss was in black sweatpants and a tight tank top, her hair damp as if from a recent shower. Her eyes were wide, not with alarm, but with something akin to panic. Elara. Her voice was rough, disbelieving. What are you doing here? How did you? The code was my birthday backwards, Elara Morrow said, stepping further inside. Water dripping from her coat onto the polished concrete floor. A little obvious for a master assassin, don't you think? Nix Voss just stared, her body rigid. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. I could have been working. Liar, Elara Morrow said softly, her voice gaining strength. You're just hiding. I'm giving you space, Nix Voss countered, her jaw tight. A normal life. The life you're supposed to have, not this. She gestured around the bleak room, a flicker of self-loathing in her eyes. Whatever this is that what you think I want? Elara Morrow took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The air crackled with tension. A normal life after everything with someone who doesn't know what it's like to be hunted, who doesn't know what I know, who doesn't know you. You deserve that. Nix Voss insisted, her voice cracking. You deserve picnics and sunlight and a partner who doesn't have blood permanently staining their hands, not a monster who collects nightmares for a living. The word hung in the air between them. Monster. Elara Morrow was directly in front of her now, close enough to see the rapid pulse in Nix Voss's throat, the storm of anguish in her gray eyes. Stop it, Elara Morrow commanded, her voice trembling with emotion. Stop telling me what I deserve. I get to decide that. And you are not a monster. A monster wouldn't have spared me. A monster wouldn't have killed for me to keep me safe. A monster wouldn't text me pictures of pigeons because it made her think of my smile. Nix Voss looked away, her defenses crumbling. Elara, please. You don't understand. This thing between us. It was born in a moment of extreme danger. It's not real. It can't be. Look at me, Elara Morrow whispered. When Nix Voss refused, Elara Morrow reached out, her touch gentle but firm, and cupped Nix Voss's cheek, turning her face back toward her. Nix Voss flinched at the contact as if it burned, but she didn't pull away. A single traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down Nix Voss's cheek. Elara Morrow caught it with her thumb. Is this not real? Elara Morrow asked, her own eyes filling with tears. Is the way you look at me when you think I'm not looking not real? Is the way you relax when I'm near you not real? Is the way I feel, like half of my soul is missing when you're gone? Is that not real enough for you? Nix Voss was breathing raggedly, her carefully constructed walls lying in ruins around her. Every reason, every logical argument for why this was a mistake evaporated under the heat of Elara Morrow's gaze. I'm so afraid, Nix Voss confessed, the admission ripped from somewhere deep and hidden. I'm afraid I'll tarnish you. I'm afraid I won't know how to love you gently. I only know how to possess, to protect, to destroy. Then let me teach you, Elara Morrow pleaded, her thumb stroking Nix Voss's cheek. Let me show you. Stop running from me. The kiss, the space between them vanished. It was Nix Voss who closed it, with a broken, desperate sound that was half sob, half surrender. She surged forward and captured Elara Morrow's lips with her own. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a conflagration. It was weeks of longing, fear, and repressed desire exploding into a single seismic moment. It was raw, passionate, and utterly devastating. Nix Voss's hands came up to frame Elara Morrow's face, her touch initially desperate, almost clumsy, before softening into something infinitely tender. Elara Morrow melted into her, her arms winding around Nix Voss's neck, pulling her closer, answering the kiss with every ounce of love and certainty she possessed. She could taste the salt of their mingled tears, the coffee Nix Voss had been drinking, and the unique essential flavor that was purely Nix Voss. It was a kiss that was a confession, an apology, a promise, and a homecoming all at once. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads rested together. They stood there in the middle of the dim, sterile room, clinging to each other as the rain beat a frantic rhythm against the windows, a symphony for their new beginning. Nix Voss's eyes were closed, her breathing still uneven. A faint, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. So, she murmured, her voice husky and warm against Elara's mouth. Was that your way of saying thank you? Or should I expect a casserole, too? Elara Morrow laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that filled the empty space. She brushed her nose against Nix Voss. The casserole comes later, she whispered. First, I believe you owe me several weeks of cuddles. Your bed is ridiculously large and lonely. Nix Voss opened her eyes, and the look in them was one Elara Morrow had never seen before. Utterly open, completely unguarded, and blazing with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Then I suppose I'd better start making up for lost time, Nix Voss said, and leaned in to kiss her again, this time with a sweet, slow certainty that promised forever. Part 10. Passion and New Beginnings. The sterile safe house was no longer a way station between life and death. It had been consecrated, transformed by the seismic shift that had occurred within its walls. The air, once cold and still, now hummed with a new, intimate energy. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, a private applause for the two souls who had finally stopped fighting the inevitable. Nix Voss's bedroom was indeed large, a Spartan space dominated by a low, wide platform bed. It was functional, like everything else she owned. But as she led Alara into it, the room seemed to reshape itself around them, its purpose redefined. The first kiss at the door had been about confession and desperate need. The next ones were about discovery. They were slower, deeper, a languid exploration of a territory each had only dreamed of mapping. Nix Voss's hands, so lethal and precise, trembled as they unbuttoned Alara Morrow's rain-soaked coat, letting it fall to the floor with a soft, forgotten thud. Her touch was reverent, as if handling something infinitely precious and fragile. Alara Morrow, in turn, was not shy. Her hands slid under Nix Voss's tank top, palms flat against the warm, taut skin of her back, feeling the powerful muscles and the fine lattice of old scars, a history written on her skin. She traced them gently, not with pity, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the woman who had borne them and survived. There were no more words, only breaths exchanged, sighs whispered into the space between mouths meeting. Clothes were shed not in a frantic rush, but with a deliberate, aching slowness that built the tension into something exquisite. When they finally stood bare before each other in the lamplight, it was a silent vow. Nix Voss's gaze was a physical caress, drinking in the sight of Alara Morrow, all golden skin and soft curves, as if she were the first thing she had truly seen. And Alara Morrow saw Nix Voss not as a weapon or a protector, but as a woman, a beautiful, powerful, flawed woman, whose body was a testament to a life of violence, but whose eyes now held only vulnerability and wonder. They fell into the bed, a tangle of limbs and soft laughter. Nix Voss, always the one in control, let it slip away. She allowed Alara Morrow to guide her, to touch her, to learn her. And Alara Morrow did so with a tenderness that unraveled Nix Voss completely. Their love-making was a study in contrasts, fierce and gentle, desperate and patient, raw and incredibly sweet. It was the final silent language of their story. Nix Voss's kisses were possessive, branding Alara as hers, while her hands held her as if she were made of glass. Alara Morrow's responses were ardent, giving herself over completely, her trust the most potent aphrodisiac Nix Voss had ever known. Afterwards, they lay entwined in the dark, the only sound their synchronized breathing and the gentle rain. Nix Voss, who always slept on the edge of the bed, alert to every sound, had pulled Alara Morrow into the center, wrapping herself around her from behind, her face buried in Alara Morrow's hair, her arm a protective band across her stomach. For the first time in a decade, Nix Voss fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her body and soul finally at peace. The morning, Alara Morrow woke first to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the high windows. She was still wrapped in Nix Voss's embrace, their legs tangled together. She lay still, savoring the feeling of Nix Voss's steady breath against her neck, the solid warmth of her body. This, she thought, was the safest she had ever felt. She felt Nix Voss stir behind her, a soft, sleepy murmur against her skin. The arm around her waist tightened almost imperceptibly. Alara smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. Nix Voss made a low, grumbling sound that vibrated through Alara Morrow's back. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment. "Too early," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. Alara Morrow turned in her arms to face her. Nix Voss's hair was a glorious, chaotic mess, sticking up in every possible direction. Dark strands fell across her forehead and into her eyes. She looked younger, softer, utterly disarmed. Alara Morrow's heart swelled with a love so fierce it was almost painful. She reached up and gently brushed the hair from Nix Voss's face. "I see the rumors are true," Elara Morrow teased, her voice full of affection. Nyx Voss cracked one eye open. Suspicious. What rumors? The legendary ghost of the underworld has absolutely terrifying bedhead. A slow, lazy smirk spread across Nyx Voss's face. She caught Elara's hand and brought it to her lips, kissing her palm. A calculated tactic. She deadpanned. It's so frightening. My enemies would simply surrender on sight. Saves on ammunition. Elara Morrow laughed, the sound echoing joyfully in the quiet room. She leaned forward and kissed her. A soft good morning kiss that tasted of sleep and possibility. I love it, she murmured against her lips. It's the first thing I've seen that makes you look approachable. The ritual. They eventually rose, pulling on clothes. Elara Morrow in one of Nyx Voss's black t-shirts that hung to her thighs. Nyx Voss in her sweatpants and a fresh tank top. The domesticity of it was surreal and perfect. Nyx Voss moved to her expensive, complicated espresso machine. Her movements automatic, but this time she pulled down to cups instead of one. How do you take it? She asked her back to Elara Morrow. Elara Morrow, who was peering into the starkly empty refrigerator, smiled. A little milk if you have any. Which of course you don't because you're a robot. Nyx Voss glanced over her shoulder, a mock-offended look on her face. I have tactical nutrient paste. Very efficient. Elara Morrow wrinkled her nose. I'd rather drink. The rain. A few minutes later, Nyx Voss handed her a cup of perfectly black espresso. You'll learn to appreciate the purity, she said, her tone serious, but her eyes dancing. Elara Morrow took a sip, shuddering dramatically at the intense bitterness. It's awful. I love it. She took another smaller sip. We're going grocery shopping today. I'm buying milk and eggs and joy in a jar. Nyx Voss leaned against the counter, watching her. Her espresso forgotten in her hand. The early morning light caught the side of her face, and she seemed to glow from within. The usual grim set of her mouth was gone, replaced by a look of soft, unguarded wonder. You're staring, Elara Morrow said, feeling a blush creep up her neck. I'm memorizing, Nyx Voss replied, her voice quiet and utterly sincere. The promise. They took their coffee to the couch, sitting close, their sides pressed together. The silence was comfortable, filled not with things unsaid, but with the simple pleasure of each other's presence. Elara Morrow set her cup down and turned to face Nyx Voss, her expression growing serious. What happens now? Nyx Voss took a breath, setting her own cup aside. She took both of Elara's hands in hers, her thumbs stroking her knuckles. Whatever you want, she said. I have resources, identities. We could go anywhere. You could have any life you choose. I will keep you safe. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never have to look over your shoulder again. Elara Morrow listened, her heart full. It was the ultimate offering from a woman who had nothing else to give, but it wasn't what she wanted. I don't want to run away, Nyx, she said, using the nickname for the first time. It felt right on her tongue. I don't want a new life. I want our life right here with you. Nyx Voss's eyes searched hers. This isn't much of a life. It's hiding. It's not hiding if we're together. Elara Morrow counted. Well, make it our own. We'll get curtains. We'll paint a wall. We'll get a cat to keep your pigeon company. You can be my terrifyingly efficient head of security for real, and I'll be the one who reminds you to eat something that didn't come out of a tube. A real smile, breathtaking in its openness, broke across Nyx Voss's face. A partnership against the world, Elara Morrow affirmed, squeezing her hands. Nyx Voss leaned forward, resting her forehead against Elara Morrow's. You saved me, you know, she whispered. The words are sacred confession. In every way a person can be saved. Elara Morrow shook her head, her eyes glistening with happy tears. She brought a hand up to cup Nyx Voss's cheek. No, sunshine. You saved me first. And in the quiet of the morning, in their safe house that was slowly becoming a home, they sealed their new beginning with a kiss. A promise of a future written not in blood, but in light. together.